I don't know what made this memory come back this week, but I reflected on high school some 30-something years ago and being in typing class. How many of you took typing in high school? It's like my favorite class, right? It's like the best life skill ever. But there was a drill that you had in typing class, and this was a drill that was given to you because it was supposed to allow you to use all of the fingers on both hands, and I bet you're going to know what it is. Yes. And it is, now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. Enough said. Thank you so much. And I just stopped in the hallway of my house this week and I went, oh my God, now is the time. Now is the time. The drill was to be able to use both hands to reach out and to master all of the keys. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. Now is the time for all good men and women to remember who they are and to come to the aid of not just some, but the entirety of our country. And we do that with both hands. And we do that with both eyes. And we do that singularly with one mind and one heart. And that's why we're here. And I want you to hear me when I say all people, not just those that we agree with. And today is very much centered around that as we close out our February theme of inclusivity and diversity. We've done a serpentine path of really looking at the nuance of that, the holistic component of that, and what diversity really means, what inclusivity really means, and not just those things that, again, we agree with or that are convenient, but all of humankind, and what is ours to do in terms of the way in which we perceive that. And it's definitely not for the weak of heart, but it is for the strong portal of the heart that is conditioned to that which is the life beat of humanity to constantly be resuscitated. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I need the paddles. Both figuratively and physically. So I read this. If you're familiar with Mark Nepo, a wonderful writer, he wrote this piece a while back. He said, Lynn Harley, an independent educator who lives in the wilds of the Yukon, tells the story of two skiers crossing a frozen lake at night. Sliding through the snow with flashlights, they come upon a moose which has fallen through the ice. And this enormous creature was stuck shoulder high, and it was clear that the moose couldn't get out, and they alone couldn't pull it out. The temperature was dropping, so they stayed the entire night. And though the moose resisted, they covered the animal with their tent, and they set about taking the small light, hoping that whatever that light and whatever small amount of heat it could generate, that they would shine that light on the shards of the ice in order for the ice not to puncture the moose's throat. And they stayed that way, in that position, for the entirety of the night. And in the morning, when the sun did reappear, that is when they went for help. And together, with assistance, they were able to rope this moose and slowly pull it to the edge until it could find its own way. And Mark Nepo wrote that this is such an incredibly powerful metaphor for how you and I are to be with or to listen to those who have fallen through. Today's lesson is about active listening. And so he writes, those who have fallen through, to stay close, to keep them warm, resisting the urge to prematurely solve the situation. If nothing can be done, sit with them. and withstand the urge to abandon those who seem stuck. Offer your tent and stay till the way out presents itself, not forcing a rescue. I don't know about you, how many of us need to hear this? For life, he says, is long enough that we will have the times when we don't know what to do in the moment. And when we meet like that, when we meet in the vulnerability of those situations, let us learn how to have the skill of heart to let love meet the truth like the small light on the ice. And in that truth and in helping one another, we will discover that there actually has been a way out all along. And the way out is the way out of divisiveness. It is the way out of that which tells us that we are separate or different from. And so this idea of active listening or deep listening, or I would even call it spiritual listening, is something that moves beyond just what happens with the physical ears. But it's, as we've talked about before, we used that word a couple of weeks ago, of being in attendance to another person. To be in attendance to listen intuitively. To be able, like we talked about last week, to have that trust and that instinctual knowing and that blinding flash of moment, the guidance that takes us to the awareness, that cuts through all of the effect. Those are the things that ask us to be cultivated. And those are the things that more so now than ever, at least in the world that we know, in this human experience that we have had, that we cannot sit idly by and listen the way that we've listened before. We cannot actually converse the way in which we've conversed before. Everything is pointing towards being more mindful in the way that we are present, in the way in which we are projecting and examining our judgments and our biases, and humbling ourselves enough to own when we are not in alignment with that. And so I went to lobbyist training this week. Yes, my sentiments exactly. Lobbyist training for clergy. I was told that clergy are the most powerful lobbyists. Who knew? Only because that it is an assumption on the political arena that somehow, some way we have a base and that we have an influence with that base. And they look upon that with great respect. And in this training, what I realized is that there are facets of my life where I am a poor listener. And this was one of them. Because I left with a massive headache after about 3.5 hours. And I was thinking, who in their right mind would want to do this? Because you are trained that you can't go in with the evidence that you have against said politician and then announce that and hold that against them. You don't go in and try to overpower or override or demand something. You go in, and in that communication, you have to do the dance with the untruth. You have to do the dance with the vagueness. You have to do the dance. And I'm like, I don't want to do the dance. I just want the John Travolta finish. Cut to the chase. And I was like, no. And I'm thinking, well, what's the effectiveness of that? And yet, at the same time, what really floored me was that I went into this training with the assumption that I'm right. And that whoever I'm going to be meeting with in terms of what I'm lobbying is wrong. That was a huge eye-opener. And as I sat with that, I realized that so often what we have done, particularly at this time in our country, that's the fence, the divisive fence. Is they're right or I'm wrong? No, it's the other way around. I'm right and they're wrong. That would be a miracle. But it's in being so rooted in that we stop listening. Hear me. We stop listening when we are so convinced that we are right. And so as I was looking through a bunch of material and finding things, I came across a writer by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote something called Life Together, and it was all of these masterful points about how to be or cultivate good listening skills. And the first one was, it said, good listening requires patience. Didn't do very well in that training. You know, I was like, come on, get to the meat stuff. But it was all about how you have to listen, not just with your ears, but with your eyes. You have to listen with your heart. You have to intuit enough to know that there is a dance going on. And that if what you're wanting is a positive result for all people, then you have to be able to realize that there are nuggets of truth and wisdom and good stuff on both sides. And if you're not willing to be in the attendance of that energy, then you'll think that you're the only one that has the goods. And so it takes patience. And it said, unfortunately, many of us are too preoccupied with ourselves when we listen. You ever been in a circle? Everybody has to share. Your time's coming up. You haven't heard a thing anybody else has said. Because you're like, what am I going to say? Somebody just said that you changed their life or that you won a lottery ticket. You don't hear because you're going, what am I going to say when it's my turn? And a lot of times that's what we're doing, is we're waiting for that breath to be able to interject what it is that we want them to hear rather than being able to listen. And so patience. We are busy either deciding what to say in response or mentally rejecting the other person's point of view. Good listening also is an act of love. Half-eared listening. You know how we often talk about half-hearted action? And that what we are really called to be are wholehearted individuals. Wholehearted meaning, first of all, you understand the way in which law operates. Spiritual law operates. Anything that you and I do half-heartedly produces what? Half-hearted results. Even though we're expecting the whole enchilada. And then we complain. When in actuality, we're not in alignment because we've only half-heartedly participated in the thing that we're saying that we're wanting. Some people might call them sideline critics. We're saying, or passive activists, rather than really getting in the nit and the grit and the dirty of it and being involved in that wholeheartedly. Then we have skin in the game. But when we do things half-heartedly, and then we complain, it doesn't make any sense. So the same thing applies with half-eared listening. It's when we despise the other and we're only waiting, again, for that chance to speak and then to get rid of the other person. It's like, clockwork. You have 15 minutes, get rid of them. Poor listening then rejects. Good listening embraces. Poor listening diminishes the other person, while good listening invites them to exist. And that word just jumped off the page for me. It invites them to exist, which drew me into a quote this week from someone I deeply admire, Laverne Cox, the actress on Orange is the New Black, the transgendered actress and activist. And when she was asked about this present bill, this bathroom bill that continues to dominate, she said, when trans people can't access public bathrooms, we can't go to school effectively, go to work effectively, access healthcare facilities. It's about us existing in public space. And those who oppose trans people having access to the facilities consistent with how they identify know that all the things they claim don't actually happen. It's really about us not existing. It's about erasing trans people. And when she said that, I went, it's exactly right, because what she's talking about is the effect. It's not the effect of the bathroom. It's about the cause of wanting them not to exist because they're different. or they don't understand, whoever they are that feels so compelled to be flustered or fearful because of their ignorance. Now we can go and we can say that about any group. We can say that about Fuji's mother as a Japanese American woman. Simply because she's Japanese, she's put into an internment camp. And we start to see the way this thing is replicated over and over and over again. And by the way, all of our trans people, I want you to know, you have sanctuary here. Good listening asks perceptive questions. In the book of Proverbs, it says, "It is the fool who takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in exercising one's opinions, and thus gives an answer before they hear. The purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." Good listening asks perceptive, open-ended questions that don't tee up yes or no answers, but gently peel this onion and probe beneath the surface. It reminds me of our practitioner training. When I use the word practitioner, if you're fairly new with us, you're going to hear that word a lot. But a practitioner in our spiritual community is much like a chaplain. And they are someone who has taken this sacred vow to be able to be in attendance with people, to be in that listening, sacred listening, but to realize that what they are hearing most of the time is the effect. And it is their spiritual duty to know a truth, a greater truth, that is rooted in cause. What does that mean? It means to know that when people are in that exchange, the practitioner must rely on the fact that there is only one power and one presence, and that the wholeness of that person is the reality of that person. So let me go back to something that was a part of the practitioner curriculum this past week. We were talking about surrender and acceptance. And in the material, I said there's really only one thing that you are ever to accept. Only one thing that you are ever to accept. Can anybody tell me what that is? And very dryly, Penelope Williams, who is a practitioner student, said, cash. And I said, there are only two things that you are to ever accept. Anybody want to make a guess what the other thing other than cash is? What's the only thing, really, as a spiritual being, that you are to accept? That there is a divine order, always, without exception. This divine order is the activity of an intelligence, of a supreme love, that is the essence, the creation of life itself. There is no circumstance, there's no level of heinous activity, there's no war, there's no action of human beings' hatred towards other human beings that would ever dissipate that particular truth. But you see, we have the gift of free will. And because we have the gift of free will, we can deny, or we can resist, or we can veil, or we can cover this, and we can forget who we are. But the only thing to accept, if you are really serious about doing this thing called life in the utmost of spiritual integrity, is to know that there is an infallible divine order that is running everything. Now, imagine that you sign up to be a practitioner and you take a sacred vow that that's what you're going to know every single time somebody comes to you for prayer. And it's not as cut and dry as it sounds. Because one of the things that is revealed in practitioner training is whatever your issue is going to show up right in front of your face. And what's going to happen most of the time is that we're going to want to commiserate often in the effect. And it's very hard to always know that we're not treating for or praying for about the effect. Because you can change the effect all day. You can put patches on wounds all day. You can rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic all day. But if you don't do something about the cause, if you're not willing to be invested in where did this thought come from? Where did this marginalized belief come from? If we're not invested in changing the cause, which is the practitioner's responsibility, then nothing really ever changes. We have moments or pockets of relief, but it's not sustainable. And often what happens is that we will come into environments in order to heal whatever disruption there is there, and then we get just enough, and then off we go back into the world of effect. And we're really not skilled enough to understand that we're just going to repeat the same cycle. What we understand is I must go in and I must begin to dismantle the cause and change that belief. And so in their curriculum it said, we come to an understanding of this acceptance. And in this understanding we let go. We accept that there is an intelligent system. We come to understand that everything, even in its most minuscule form, has its own consciousness. That this consciousness then, whether fortunate or unfortunate, comes in groupings. And that is the thing that creates this subjective consensus, meaning that you can get a grouping of people to believe certain things, even though it's not in harmony with the intelligence, the infallible intelligence and divine order. And that thing, that belief will become their reality because you and I have free will. And I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about all of us, because we all do it. And so the surrender part is surrendering anything that is standing in the way of accepting that as a fundamental truth. That means I've got to surrender how this is going to look. And see, those of us who need to be in control are going to have a really hard time in surrendering the how. But I want you to think about what happens when you really fully surrender the how, and you accept that you are fueled. Like, think of yourself as having a jetpack on your back. You're fueled by divine order. That's going to change the whole way in which you and I show up. It's going to change the whole way in which we lobby. It's going to change the whole way in which we look at the chaos of the world. Because I guarantee you, if we are fueled by the acceptance that there's a divine order, you and I will not burn out. Because we will be led by vision, not by resistance or fighting against something. You have to be led by vision. We must be led by vision. And to be led by vision means we must be able to articulate what that vision is. That's why I said last week about, where's your value statement? Because that's the thing that's going to be the fuel that's going to lead you into circumstances where great listening is going to be required. Where being in attendance with others who are in pain, who are not like us, is going to be required. But to know that as you walk into whatever that circumstance is, it's not what I foolishly thought when I was doing the training, which is this is a no-win situation. It's like, David, everything is a win situation. Remember when Michael Beckwith says you learn some, you grow some, but you never lose some. So there's no such thing as wasted time. Everything that has happened to us, at us, through us, has been for us in order for you and I to be able to sit in the chair that we sit in this morning and know and say and do and act and be what is required of us. That's the beauty of contrast. That's the beauty of the human painful experience. Because if we have not had that, our credibility in consciousness is very small. And so we must understand and accept that there's something far greater, something far more masterful than what our small-minded, myopic self that wants to control everything is trying to do. And so good listening, again, asks perceptive questions. It peels that onion away. Good listening also prepares us to be able to speak well. Proverbs again says, while the fool gives an answer before he hears, the wise person tries to resist defensiveness and to listen from a non-judgmental stance, training themselves not to formulate opinions or responses until the full update is on the table and the whole story is there. There's nothing more uncomfortable than being in the energy of defensiveness, whether it's coming from us or the other person. Because all listening stops. All communication stops. Because again, it is right or wrong, good or bad. And the label then creates that separation where no solution can occur. And I'm telling you, it takes training for all of us to be able to stand, to sit with the moose, to shine the light on the sharp edges that feel so dangerous sometimes, that feel so threatening, and to not participate in anything that is defensive. And that goes with language. That goes with communication. That goes with social media. That goes with everything that is sucking us into this inflammatory stuff. I'm in full agreement of the way in which what we do affects us physically. And what I'm starting to see more and more, and this is the word, inflammation. And so when we are inflamed in our rhetoric, and when we are inflammatory in the way in which we produce, that inflammation finds its way in our bodies. And I'm seeing more and more and more and more people whose physical bodies are inflamed because it corresponds with the mental process of what we are so deeply absorbed in. And active listening asks us, it begs us, it compels us to understand that there is a greater reality and the thing that we are to accept. I want to say again how much I have loved this book that has been a part of our monthly library, if you were so inclined. It's called Blink. It's really hard to describe this book, but I find that it's almost a psychological adventure story. Psychological in that Malcolm Gladwell, the author, shows so brilliantly how much we are missing in the world because either we're not able to listen, or we have these preconceived judgments, or that we don't trust that initial, what we called last week, thin slicing, where that guidance tells us immediately what it is that we need to know. Good listening also doesn't just happen with the ears, but it also happens through the eyes. And at the very end of the book, he starts to talk about how it was very hard for women in the classical orchestra world in Europe to get hired because there was this belief, these European conductors who thought that only men could play these particular instruments. Something feminine like a piccolo might allow the woman to be able to be in the orchestra. But anything else unlike that, those jobs were always given to men, even though the women played better. And it wasn't until there was an audition And one of the panelists' family members was auditioning that they put up a screen. And he tells this incredible, compelling story of how this woman came in with her trombone. And there were many trombonists who were auditioning. And she was like number 17, and there were about another 30 to go. And when she played, the entire panelist, including the conductor, said, "That's it. Everyone else can go home. That's the one that we want." And they were just like in awe of the technique and the precision and the nuance by which this person played. And then she walked from around the corner. And they thought there must be some mistake. I won't go into all of the details, but I will tell you she fought for 8 years for her place in the equality, to be able to change that stigma. And then he relates a modern day story here in our own country. And he said Julie Landsman auditioned for the role of Principal French Horn at the Met. The screens had just gone up in the practice hall. At the time, there was no women in the brass section of the orchestra, because everyone knew that women could not play the horn as well as men. But Landsman, Julie Landsman, came and she sat down and she played incredibly well. She said, "I knew in my last round that I had won before they even told me. It was because of the way I performed that last piece. I held on to that last high C for a very long time." It was just to leave no doubt in their minds. And they started to laugh because it was above and beyond the call of duty. But when they declared her the winner and she stepped out from behind the screen, there was a gasp. It wasn't just that she was a woman and a female horn player were rare, as had been the case with the woman in Europe. And it wasn't just that she was so bold and extended that high C, which was kind of the macho sound that was only expected from a man. It was because they knew her. Landman had played for the Met before as a substitute. And it wasn't until they listened to her, just with their ears, that they had any idea of how good she was. Because the screen created for them that thin slice moment we talked about, that intuitive knowing that they knew exactly that that was the best player. And it was in those immediate seconds that truth was prevailed. But truth gets clouded by listening with our eyes, meaning that we judge what it is that we see. We judge what it is that we are conditioned as right or wrong. We judge. And sometimes we are not even aware of the fact that we're doing it. I humbly asked for forgiveness because I knew that in that lobbying moment, I was self-righteous. And that I had a lot to learn when it came to actually being effective solution for all of what we are trying to accomplish here. I think you're going to have another screen moment this morning. I think what you're about to experience with our choir and with our special guest is a gift that often is propelled only to those who are much older, much more seasoned. But I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to realize that there are those who walk among us much, much younger than all of us in this room that should be our teachers, that should be our leaders. And it's time that we pay due respect to them. And so it is. Hi, I'm David Ault, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision,
And that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.